Oh, you didn't lose a necklace. The necklace is lost. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, no, I'm gonna go find this. Okay, bye. Welcome back to the Callback with me, Lauren Allen. Today we're gonna be talking about an episode of television from the series Your Showtime called The Necklace. And Dr. Molly Schneider is going to help us find it. All right, let's get into it. Now, what do I know about necklaces? Nothing, except they're pretty. Here are some things that you gotta know about this show. So this was the first Emmy winner. Brother. Ugh. So this was the first Emmy winner. Because there weren't really like showrunners, as far as I know, during this time, the Emmy was accepted by the producer, Stanley Rubin. Most of the other episodes of television at this time were recorded live, whereas this one was recorded on film as a movie and then given to television to then broadcast, which is kind of weird, but also very lucky because we still have it in the UCLA archives. So it originally was called Your Showtime. That was like the title, and then they'd have titles for each episode. When they started doing reruns, they renamed it to Story Theater. This isn't necessarily like your typical TV that you would see today. It's more of an anthology. So instead of like following along one storyline, you've got a narrator who's taking you through each of these stories. And most of these are like short stories from Europe or ancient history that then were collected and then made into half-hour episodes, which really, there's enough of the narrator that you're only making about 15 minutes of a story. Television, especially at this time, was directly linked to who was sponsoring them. So the sponsors would be like, hey, we will help you pay for your TV show. However, you need to mention us somewhere within the episode. Lucky Strike Cigarettes was the one that sponsored this episode. You're actually not gonna be able to see my reactions to this because we had to go to UCLA and they have pretty strict recording rules, which is fine. It's great. However, I did get to actually see this with Dr. Molly Schneider in person before we ended up having our interview. So with that, we're gonna go straight into our interview with Dr. Schneider. Hello.
Hey Lauren, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing okay. So thank you for having me on your podcast.
Of course. Of course. No, this is so exciting. And like I think it's cool because we've already met and so then it's just like, oh wait, this is just like perfect to just, jump right in. For people who don't know you, don't know your work, what got you into it? What's been the journey there?
What I'm about most is anthology dramas. Like I am the anthology evangelist. Like that's what most of my work is on. That's what folks sort of know me as a scholar, especially the 1950s and 1960s anthologies. I had sort of a circuitous route into television studies in the first place. So I was a performance studies major in undergrad. It's like a little bit theater, it's a little bit literary adaptation, it's a little bit cultural studies, which turns out is really well suited to early television history.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to graduate school for film and television studies and came to Northwestern to do my PhD. And there are just some incredible faculty there who are experts in television history, in particular Lynn Spiegel, who's really, really foundational in the development of television studies as an actually respected field in the academy. Like legendary television historian, and I was like so lucky to work with her. And I was sitting in one of her classes. I'm a baby PhD student sitting in my classes, trying to figure out what I'm going to write my dissertation about. And she showed the original television drama of Marty. So Marty is better known for the movie. That was made in 1955, and it won Best Picture, which was a big deal because it was this kind of small scale black and white film when the
Yeah.
industry was moving more toward, CinemaScope and Technicolor and all of that stuff, partly as a way to compete with television, right? So it's better known for that. It won the first Palme d'Or at Cannes and all that stuff. but it was originally based on a live television play, or anyway, an episode of Goodyear Television Playhouse. And at the time, these things were called television plays. A lot of them were done live. They weren't all done live, but a lot of them in the early days were done live, and they referred to as television plays. But what it really was an episode of this anthology, Goodyear Television Playhouse. And it's sort of just a legendary script. And it really kind of just hit me right in the feels because it's about a sort of lonely guy. And I had just gone through a breakup. And so there was kind of that part of it. But it was also like, this is so fascinating. I mean, this was done live, which, first of all, I always try to remind my students, don't just look at this as a TV show. Remember, they're doing this live.
Yeah.
Like they're literally performing it like a stage play, but in front of live cameras. And they know live TV a little bit, but mostly at this point, it's like sports that they're watching live, or, something that's like a really special one-time event TV. And I'm like, they're doing this every week live. They're
Yeah.
putting on a brand new play with a brand new set and a brand new cast and everything
Yeah.
every week live. So it just sort of struck me at this particular moment when I was trying to figure out which direction I was going to go. And I knew I was interested in history. I knew I was interested in the sort of performative aspects because I had come from this performance studies background. And
Yeah.
I just really loved it. The writing was good. It was so fascinating to me that it was live. I just kind of I encountered it at the right moment, and now I'm just, now I'm just totally in the deep end of anthologies and published a book on it. Still doing more work on it.
Yeah.
There's so much more to say. I'll never finish. More people are joining in. It will never be done. So there's so much to keep looking into.
Well, and I mean, I think you're being modest. You wrote a book that also won a fairly big award.
It did win an award. Yes, it did.
So, like,
It's
you're
actually it's right there.
yeah. So,
That's my book, and that's my award.
yeah. So let's, we can acknowledge where your expertise has taken you as well. Um,
Thank you.
and I'm sure that in your undergrad, you're like, you never would have thought that this would have been the thing that now you dedicate your life to.
Yeah, I mean, in undergrad, I thought I was going to be working in professional theater, and I did for a while before I went to grad school. And I love professional theater. I'll never not, have a love for professional theater.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, it was sort of by degrees. I sort of ended up in the sort of film and media study side. I will also say, before I even started my PhD, when I was still doing my master's degree at USC, I took a class where we were required to do archival research. And I'm so grateful to Rick Jewell for including that as part of the class because
Yeah.
I had to find an archive to use. I went and I used the Margaret Herrick Library at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I also used the Warner Brothers Archive, which is hosted at by USC. And I just got addicted. I got addicted to archival research. I'm like 23 years old, sitting in a basement archive holding a piece of paper that's like a letter between Elizabeth Taylor and Jack Warner. Like,
Yeah.
how can you not get addicted to that?
No.
So I just, even before I was working on television in particular, I just, I really credit the faculty at USC for, giving me the archive bug and making me realize like, oh my gosh, there's so much amazing stuff here. How could you not want to be doing this every day?
Right.
So it started there. And then when I did my PhD, I was sort of, I wasn't totally decided on television yet, but then I started taking more classes. I started looking more into this stuff. And as I said, just, the stars kind of aligned for me to encounter this really important text at the right moment. And I
Yeah.
just sort of went in that direction.
I met you through one of my professors, and I think it's been so gratifying to be able to meet the experts of the field, and of the craft that I'm currently in the process of production of, and it's like
Mhm.
really looking back to these foundational pieces. How did we get here? What are we bringing back? What were the elements that made those time periods so special and informative to where we are now? I think with us being able to be lucky enough to find the episode of The Necklace, which was somewhat difficult to track down, and being able to watch that in person with you was so cool, and getting all these insights, even the fact that you were like, hey, this was actually shot on film. This wasn't live. And I wouldn't have known that. I'd love to hear more about what your experience was from that, from just watching it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad you contacted me because it gave me a really good excuse to seek this out. And of course, as soon as we watched it, I started looking into it more and trying to find more information. And I found, the article that was published by the producer who won that first Emmy explaining some of the production history. And I was like, oh, I didn't know any of this. This is such good info because I can make some assumptions based on, some experience, but there was stuff I was just wrong about, right? I was just wrong
Yeah.
because sometimes the ways that things happen, especially in early TV when it was kind of the Wild West, right?
Yeah.
Uh, there are just nuances you don't know about. There are histories of sort of the things that people do to get things in the can that are probably not the way that any textbook would tell you to do it. but
Yep.
but they did it because there was nobody saying that's not how you do it. I
Right.
mean, in some ways there were, some things were established, but a lot of times it was kind of like, well, nobody's ever done an anthology on film before. I guess we're gonna.
Yeah.
Nobody said you can't.
Yeah.
So they did. It's such an interesting confluence of obviously there's some kind of overlap with the film industry. There's a lot of overlap with the radio industry that I think a lot of people who aren't as familiar with radio maybe don't recognize how much of television and early television practice comes from radio, and how many writers came from radio, and
Yeah.
how many genres and formats came from radio. It's taking pieces from the film industry, it's taking pieces from the radio industry, it's taking pieces from the stage theater and sort of putting them together in these really fascinating ways. I loved watching that because not only because of course it won the first Emmy and so it's notable because of that, but because it's such an amazing artifact of those early days of television where we're sort of like we need to figure out how to do this. How do you do television? Because it's, when they're starting to develop that, it's what, 1948? Television exists, but in very limited ways. There are, maybe a few dozen cities that have TV at that point, maybe probably less than 50 stations across the country.
Yeah.
A few percent of the country has televisions at all at that point.
Hmm.
So we're still figuring it out. And so watching this artifact of how do you do television with limited resources, limited infrastructure, tiny budgets,
Yeah.
very few playbooks for how to do it. And seeing, I mean, they pulled it off, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think any TV show or film that actually gets made is some kind of miracle. Like just the fact that anything gets made is some kind of miracle. But just watching how you know pretty respectably made this was for the conditions under which it was made is really really fascinating to me.
Well, and I think the other part about anthology that's really interesting, especially with the necklace, that I don't know if I was expecting is how much of it is exposition and like welcoming in an audience, right? It's not a film audience, right? It's an audience directly in people's homes. The first 5 minutes of the necklace are just like, hey, we're gonna tell you the stories, and I'm the narrator, and this, and then like getting into the story, which we don't really see as much, especially in television. I think we see more of those maybe in film. That kind of anthology style isn't as common in that way as it seems to have been. Do you have any thoughts on how it's shifted over the years, and what have you noticed from then to now?
Yeah, so it is really key that there's this host who's bringing us in. And so the anthology host is like its own really fascinating topic because there was this idea of, well, how do we get people to come back every week if the story's different every week,
Mhm.
right? Because it's, in this show in particular, we're adapting a different short story or whatever, something in the public domain because then we don't have to pay licensing fees for it, right? Because their budgets are
Yep.
minuscule. So it's a different story every week, it's a different cast every week. How do we get people to come back? And so one of the strategies was to have a host. So in this case, the host is Arthur Shields. I think that's his name, Arthur Shields.
I think
Shield or Shields. So they wanted to bring him in as sort of to be a sort of librarian figure, right? Or like a, like a bookish host, because that's the thing that would tie everything together. It would give a sense of continuity. Like every week we're going to come in and this host is going to be the familiar thing that draws you in every week, even if the story is different. And so that became a pretty common thing to do with a lot of anthologies, not all of them. And I would say probably the most kind of prominent ones that were known for the sort of literary high quality original drama, a lot of them did not have hosts, although many of them did.
Yeah.
But the host became this way of establishing a sense of continuity, because if you don't have a continuing narrative, it's not a serial, right?
Right.
Then what's going to bring you back? And so often it's the host that's supposed to bring you back and give you that sort of familiar figure. And also sponsors like the host, because often the host is going to be the one who's reading out the commercials. And so you want a familiar figure who the audience trusts and all of that. So this is a little different just because ended up being a syndicated film show. But the host is supposed to be the thing that ties it all together, because you want people to come back every week, because ratings mean money,
Mhm.
right? So first of all, the sponsor. So in this case, the sponsor is not only, giving money to have advertisements during the show. The sponsor is actually helping produce the show, and that was pretty common in early TV. So the advertising agencies would negotiate this, and so this show was not produced by NBC. It was funded by Lucky Strike cigarettes,
Right.
and they brought it to NBC.
Yeah.
So you got to keep your sponsor happy.
Yeah.
So when you've got a sponsor kind of putting up the money not only after the fact, but also to produce it, your sponsor is concerned about what's going to keep them back, keep people coming back every week, because they want more eyeballs on their advertisements, because that's how they sell more product. But then eventually the networks are also like, well, we want higher ratings, because if we are selling airtime to sponsors to run their commercials and we have higher ratings, we can charge more money to our advertisers. So that's why we want ratings, because the more people watching, the more we can charge advertisers for that spot. So that's why a Super Bowl spot is millions of dollars,
Yes.
right? But like a 6 a.m. local commercial is not, right? So more eyeballs equals more dollars. That's what the networks and the individual stations want, and that's what the sponsors want. And so what are we going to do to get people coming back? Because of course we want to make great art, right? But we also have to stay in business.
Yeah. Yep.
And if there's an article that Stanley Rubin, the producer, wrote about the whole process and realizing, oh no, we're going broke making this. What do we do? And the answer to that was keep the syndication rights and sell it to Ziv, right? And then they can recoup some of that money, because they were going over budget. So, of course we want to make great art, but we also want to, not starve to death and
Right.
be
Right.
able to pay for our studio time and pay our actors and all of that stuff.
I think the most common like host are those in reality TV, right? Like those
Hmm.
like game shows, and you have like Love Island or whatever, where I can see kind of how that mode kind of shifted over into that, because it's like, well, if Ryan Seacrest is the host of American Idol, we want to keep watching because he's interesting, or things like that. And I guess I hadn't really thought about that before, because I think we have shifted in a way where we don't see that as much in narrative television.
Yeah. Well, and the other function of a host is to summarize things we could not fit into the cut.
Yep. Yep.
Right. So depending on what we're adapting, if we're adapting a novel and we've got a half hour, we're not going to be able to fit everything in. But if you've got this host, they can sort of summarize the parts that you can't fit in,
Yeah.
which is the case for competition shows too. You can't show every twist and turn, but if you have a host, they can sort of help frame what's about to happen. They can help transition from segment to segment.
Yeah.
They can sort of help you understand the significance of what's just happened. And they're a
Right.
professional face and they bring you back every week and they sort of become trustable. And especially if you have a competition show where, in some cases, the whole point is that some people are not trustable, because that's the game.
Yeah. Yep.
The host is supposed to be the one who you're supposed to be able to trust, or at least the audience is. Whether the
Right.
contestants can trust the host is a different question. But
Right. They become like the reliable narrator. That's cool. I hadn't made that connection before. I want to jump back just a little bit too, because you were talking about live television, live performance, right? Today, really the only show that's doing that besides the news, right, is like SNL. Do you find that there are similarities between each of those or things that maybe are different in the performative aspects of, early television versus something like SNL?
Sure. So, right now the live TV that we're used to is like news and sports, right?
Yeah.
And then we have SNL, which is a sort of a unique thing. Like most of the late night shows are not live anymore. They're all taped at like 4 in the afternoon or whatever. And some of that has to do with wanting to be able to control what happens.
Yeah.
And so that was a really interesting aspect of early live TV dramas is like, let's say you've got a network or a sponsor that has some kind of objection about something about your script.
Yeah.
Either there's something politically controversial or something they think the audience is going to like, or there's a reference to a competing product
Mm.
or whatever. If it's live, oops,
Yeah.
it's too late, and so sometimes the productions would sort of leverage that and be like, oh, oops, it just happened and it's live and you can't put it back in the can, right? And so one of the things that happened when by the second half of the 50s, we're starting to transition more to filmed series rather than live. It's not all at once, right? It's a gradual move.
Right.
It also sort of coincides with more productions moving from New York to Los Angeles, and obviously Los Angeles is where the film industry is mostly based, and New York is where the theater industry is mostly based. And so there's some shifts that happen as we move across the coast. But one of the things that happens when you switch from live to film or eventually tape, the sponsor and the network can control more.
Yeah.
They can require a cut, they can require a reshoot, they can require an edit, they can refuse to air it at all. When it's live, once it's out there, it's out there. And you might get in trouble. you
Yeah.
know, the sponsor might be mad. They might threaten to leave, or somebody could get fired, or the network could get in hot water with the FCC or whatever. But once it's out, it's out. But once it's on film or on tape, it's more controllable, and that's a double-edged sword, right? So if you're the
Yeah.
producer and you want it to be really polished, then maybe film or tape is helpful because you can reshoot things that didn't look right, or if there's a mic in the shot, or whatever. But that also means somebody else can come in and try to control your show. When it's live, it's out there, it's done. You can't put the cat back in the bag. It also comes with this sort of sense of excitement, and so early TV critics actually did not like filmed television. They really preferred live. Of course, everybody's a little bit different, but the overwhelming consensus was that live television is better because it has this sense of excitement and immediacy. And that film television felt sort of canned. And it was trying too hard to be the movies, but TV can't be the movies, so stop trying. And it was felt that liveness was what would help people take the best advantage of the affordances of television,
Yeah.
right? So don't try to be the movies. Your screen is this big, it's black and white, the
Yeah.
sound's not good, the budgets are small, you're not going to be the movies.
Yeah.
Be what you are, right? And so a lot of critics argue that live TV was better, that it was more exciting, that there was this kind of sense of electricity because the performers were nervous, right? And
Yeah.
so, and anything could happen, and mistakes happened, right? There were mishaps, there were,
Yeah.
wardrobe malfunctions before we call it the wardrobe malfunctions.
Yeah.
Things break, things melt under the lights, actors forget lines, right? Like cameras malfunction, whatever. Like things happen in live TV. And in some ways, that was sort of felt like, well, that's part of it. That's part of the excitement of live TV is that anything can happen. And
Yeah.
there's this electric sense of I'm watching actors who are nervous, right? And so there's this just kind of the energy is different when it's live. It was sort of felt like, well, the best anthologies are going to be live. This great moment that the country is sharing of
Yeah.
this live piece of art.
More and more, I find myself being drawn to live theater because of that, right? Because there is that sense that at any moment, you hope nothing goes wrong, but any moment something could go wrong. Feeling that live energy is just so incredible. I really liked something too that you had said when we met up originally about how because a lot of these shows were live, that's why we don't have as many like recordings or records of them. Could you talk a little bit more
Mhm.
about that?
The great dilemma of being a scholar of television is that in the earliest days, a lot of it was done live and it wasn't recorded. In the earliest days, the only way to record a live television broadcast was to make a kinescope. And what that is, I mean, there's a whole, setup for it, but
Yeah.
essentially what it is you point a film camera at a TV screen and you film it off the TV screen. It's a little more, there's more of a setup than that, but that's
Yeah.
essentially what you do. So those recordings exist, and I'm so grateful they exist, but they're not, the highest quality recordings because they're literally filmed off a TV screen. In some cases, they're not centered so you can actually see the edge of the TV screen, and it's a little distorted, and it's not high resolution and all of that stuff. But thank God they did it, right?
Right.
I'm glad they did. A lot of them just were never recorded, and so there are instances of really celebrated performances that they didn't record, so they just had to do it again. Patterns, which is probably the live anthology that gave Rod Serling his big break in television. The first time they did it, it was live and they didn't record it, so they had to do it again.
Oh,
And they recorded it the second time because it was so popular.
right.
Because the idea of reruns was not as pervasive then as it is now. And a lot of folks were like, well, why would anybody want to watch it again? They already watched it. And now, of course, we know that's where the money is, right? Is being able to repackage it to secondary run and third run and, sell it now. You sell it to a streaming service or whatever. That's where you actually make your money. At the time it was, well, it's live. Why would we record it? And also, why would we spend the money on the film to
Right.
record it? Right. But then they did start recording them more consistently. And then they started just making more on film and then eventually on tape. And even some of those don't survive, right? Because if it's on tape, sometimes the stations or the network would just tape over it. They'd reuse the tapes because they didn't think it was valuable. Or the Dumont network, which was this kind of fourth network that kind of never quite it existed for about 10 years and it just never quite could compete with the big three, ABC, CBS, and NBC. When they were bought out, they just dumped the tapes and the reels in the river because they didn't want to. Not only did they not want to pay to store them, they didn't want to deal with the cost of distributing them somewhere else or giving them. They literally just
Yeah.
dumped them in a river.
Uh,
So just the material reality of some of these shows is so precarious. And this is
yeah.
why I'm so passionate about television archiving. Because if a major network production can disappear, guess what happens to local shows, to independent shows,
Yeah.
right? Like, especially ones that people are embarrassed about that they maybe don't want to share
Yep.
or where the rights are really complicated, like who actually owns the rights to this thing can be a really complicated question.
Yeah.
um and so maybe we can store it but we can never show it, so then what good is it?
Right.
So it's this is why I'm so passionate about television archiving, because I think a lot of people don't realize how much we never recorded in the first place,
Yeah.
how many recordings have disappeared or deteriorated to the point where they can't be restored
Hmm.
or are being held by really complicated legal arrangements so nobody can see them or whatever.
Uh-huh.
So this is why I think the work of the UCLA Film and Television Archive and other archives like that it's so important. I mean, it's just heroic work. And I know that sounds like hyperbole, but I really mean it. It's really heroic work that there are people who spend so much time and care in trying to not only keep them physically in existence, but also make sure that we are providing as much access as we can so people can actually see them.
This is maybe diverting a little bit, but the church that had all of those film tapes, and can you talk about that a little bit?
I will relay the information. If you want the really deep scoop on this, you got to talk to Mark Quigley, who's the
Yeah.
television curator at the UCLA Film and Television Archive, because he's the one who spearheaded this whole project and has published about it. And I invite him to my class to talk about it every year. There was this anthology show called Insight. And it was sort of a kind of like morality tales, and it was produced by an order of Catholic priests outside Los Angeles, or probably within Los Angeles, up on the PCH, up on the
Yeah.
Pacific Coast Highway. And so they produced this TV show that was, was just a series of morality tales. and it was produced by this priest named Father Kaiser, and he was known as the Hollywood priest. And he would get big name talent to appear in these episodes for basically union scale. And then he would be very good at convincing them to just sign those checks right back over to the organization. So we get, I mean, really famous actors or up and coming actors who are now famous
Yeah.
to do these episodes. And it was on for decades. They were storing their tapes and film reels and then eventually tapes as best they could in the headquarters of this Catholic order that was in this property that they had been, willed up on the PCH by a famous actress. And there's a whole scandal, and it used to be like a speakeasy and a nightclub and all that stuff.
Right.
So they were, storing these film reels and tapes as best they could. They were doing their best, but it just was not well suited to the conditions needed to keep celluloid and tape from deteriorating. So Mark, who is the archivist at UCLA, one morning in the middle of the night was woken up by the Northridge earthquake and turned on the TV to look for the news and saw an episode of this really kind of odd Catholic morality show and sort of did more research, figured it out, contacted the Paulist priests and negotiated with them to sort of transfer the holdings of all of their reels and tapes and all of that to UCLA for preservation. And now they've preserved as many as they have, which is a lot. And you can watch a great number of them on YouTube now. Most of them are hosted by it's called Paulist Productions. It's the name of the production company that's owned by this Catholic order of priests. Some of them are hosted by UCLA. So it's just it was often aired really late at night because one of the kind of nuances of broadcast licenses. So it's individual stations who have broadcast licenses. And part of your licensure is that you have to prove that you are providing some kind of public service. You're serving the public interest.
Mm-hmm.
And so often they would do kind of educational programming or things like that to sort of fulfill that requirement.
Yeah.
But it didn't say when you had to do it. So they would often, they'd get it for free because it was supposed to be this public service. So they'd run it at like 2 a.m. or, in the sort of dead hour of Sunday afternoon or whatever. If it weren't for an archivist working really hard to preserve this, I mean, the Paulist Productions, they really did a good job with the resources they had. They just were not equipped, to be a temperature and humidity controlled archive. And it's this odd show. It wasn't really, it was syndicated. It wasn't really like a big national program. And so something like that can disappear so easily. Even if somebody is doing their best to preserve it, something like that can disappear or nobody will know about it because it's sitting in a basement and it's not on the air anymore and, whatever. So that's just one example of a show that is not a big network show with a lot of production and a lot of a lot of promotion around it, but that is a really, really fascinating part of the archive that reminds us that there is much more variability in the types of shows that were being made. It's just not all of them survive.
Amazing. Okay, so kind of shifting to today, right? What do you have any elements of early television or practices within the industry or anything that you think we should be doing this today?
So I think some of the things that I find so inspiring about early TV are number one, just the spirit of experimentation and adventurousness, because the rule book hadn't been written yet. And there were rules from radio, there were rules from cinema, there were rules from theater and all of that. But just the idea of like, well, we're going to try it because nobody's told us we can't.
Yeah.
Nobody told us that's insane to try that. So we did. And a lot of times it worked. Sometimes it didn't. But just the idea that we have this amazing new art form, medium, commercial object, whatever, in front of us. Let's see what we can do with it. And let's figure out how we can use it to its best advantage. And how can we find the things that it's really good at? And how can we sort of produce something that is using the affordances of television to its best artistic goals, right? While also navigating very serious material and monetary constraints.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest one is like the rule book hasn't been written, so let's just try a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And we're going to recognize that some of it's not going to work.
Yeah.
But especially in an anthology, and I've seen this repeatedly in interviews, articles, all this stuff from people who are working in early anthologies, it was we could experiment because we're starting over next week anyway,
Yeah.
right? The story is new next week anyway. So it's not like, oh, we wrote ourselves into a corner with this character and now we got to figure out how to deal with it for the rest of the season or whatever.
Right.
We tried a bunch of stuff and sometimes we fell on our faces,
Yeah.
but we're going to come back next week and maybe it'll be the best show of the year. So the idea that we could try new things because it, like you were always just going to come back next week and start over anyway. So
Yeah.
try it. Like that is what I really, really loved. Um, and also just this idea among a lot of the writers and producers that they really took it seriously, and of course not everybody, right, but many of them really took it seriously that television is supposed to serve the American public in some way. And how we do that, obviously there are many different opinions about the best way to do that, but there was this really strong sense that, okay, yes, of course we all want to make money, of course we all want to have careers, of course, right?
Yeah.
But television should do something important. And not every television show lived up to that, of course, right? But there were a lot of people really saying, hey, this is really important and we need to do something important with it. And we need to be providing entertainment, education, all of these things that are going to be of service to the American public. We have this opportunity and we cannot waste it. We have to do something important here.
I love that. And I think especially as a creator in more of the production side of things, that is so comforting to hear. The industry in general, I think right now it sometimes feels really difficult to be like, "Oh yeah, I can just try what I want," because there's millions of dollars at stake. I think especially in like film and television, it seems like more and more people are begging for originality. They're begging for purpose within what we're seeing and what we're writing and what we're creating. And so I think that's really cool that that's something that they seem to also value back then. And really it's just like people are people and people want the stuff that affects them, you know.
Mhm.
I really love that. In the opposite direction, are there any like icks that either from then or from today that you're like, we got to stop doing that, or we should definitely not bring this back?
Oh, yes, many, many. So there are ones that are sort of, the obvious ones like the blacklist. We should never do that again.
Can you explain what that is a little bit for people who might?
Yeah. So a lot of people might be familiar with the Hollywood blacklist, which is sort of, it's often more known in relation to the movie industry.
Mhm.
Um, but it also was very pervasive in television and radio. And so essentially, this is during the Cold War, during the period that is often referred to as the Red Scare in American history, where we were terrified that communists were trying to infiltrate every aspect of American life. Anybody who had any potential connection or affinity had to be cast out. And if you knew of anybody who might have any potential connections to communism, you were expected to out them. And of course, not everybody did, right? Not everybody cooperated. That's why it was such a fight, right? It's because there were so many people pushing against it. And so the blacklist was this set of practices in the cinema industry, but also in film and television, where anybody who was tainted with some kind of association with communist sympathies would simply not be hired.
Hmm.
And in many cases, you were never actually directly told that that's what was happening.
Right.
Uh, and in many cases, this was done under the table. There were very few like lists written down on paper, right? What we're actually talking is your phone didn't ring,
Yeah.
and you couldn't
Yeah.
get a job. In some cases, you were explicitly told, or in some cases, you were told you have to sign this loyalty oath saying you're not a communist and you love America and all of this because we're in this massive sort of conflict with the Soviet Union, who, remember, they were our allies during World War II, but
Yeah.
very quickly they become our opposition. And the ideological messaging at the time was that communism is antithetical to the American way of life, and that the communists and the Soviets are sending agents here to infiltrate our schools and to brainwash our children, and sending them into our government agencies to steal state secrets, and that the film and television industries were especially vulnerable to being taken over by communist agents because they are so influential that they could brainwash people through film and television by hiding communist messages into, whatever. So as you can probably imagine, like writers often got the worst of it, but also actors, because if you're a writer, okay, nobody will buy your script, but you could write it under a fake name and then maybe you could make a living.
Right.
An actor, that's much harder, right?
Yeah.
Because your face is on screen. But they also went after directors and producers and, all kinds of stuff. So the blacklist it was never, almost never an actual written down list,
Right.
right? It was just that the networks and the sponsors were so terrified either of having communists working for them or of the bad PR that would come with being associated with communists that they would basically just not hire people. And I mean, people's careers were ruined. Their families were destitute. I mean, people took their own lives. Their friends wouldn't talk to them. Like lives were really, really seriously ruined. And also, it was like a lot of the things that were happening were just totally unconstitutional.
Do you see any of that today where
Oh
it's
yeah,
like what
yeah.
where are we seeing it today, and what should we be aware of?
So even at the time of the Red Scare, communist was often kind of an umbrella term for things we don't like, right? Things we think are controversial, ideologies we don't think are American enough, or whatever. So often, like if we didn't like you because you were queer, we would accuse you of being a communist, right? Or if we didn't like you because you were advocating for racial equality, we would just say you were a communist, right?
Right.
Um, and so we're sort of seeing similar things now because of the regulatory climate, for example. And I don't want to get into too many nitty gritty politics here, but we have a Federal Communications Commission who is responsible for many things, including the decisions of whether to renew broadcast licenses.
Mhm.
And if they don't like what somebody is saying, they can put pressure on a network to, as a totally hypothetical example, fire a late night comedian
Right. Right.
or cancel their show.
Yeah.
Or as we've seen this week, threaten not to renew station licenses because of somebody being interviewed on a daytime talk show. And historically, that is absolutely not what the FCC is supposed to be doing.
Right.
But the FCC is one of those agencies that sort of sways with the political wind because the commissioners are appointed by whichever party is in power.
Yeah.
I will not go into all of the deep nitty gritty nuances of the FCC, but
Sure.
that's one example where we're really seeing what is often called a chilling effect, meaning it's too dangerous to say what you think. That is the root of one of the ways that the blacklist was so insidious.
Um, okay, amazing. So blacklist is blacklisted. Um,
Yeah. I mean, some other things that I want to say we shouldn't bring back, but I'm sorry to say they haven't totally gone away.
right.
Is the fact that for example, women have historically not been granted the opportunities in television that are commensurate with their talent and experience,
Yeah.
or they haven't gotten the credit for all of the work. Because don't get it twisted, women have been doing the everyday work of keeping the television industry running since day zero.
Yeah.
Since day zero. Often did not get their names in the credits, often were kept in jobs that were not well paid, that did not have creative control, but did all of the very laborious work of keeping things running. The number of women directors in television is still way too low. The number of women writers who have their projects greenlit is still too low.
Yeah.
The amount that women writers are paid is still too low.
Yep.
And that's just specifically with women. Now let's think about the fact that so many television networks and sponsors were just terrified of mentioning anything related to race in the 1950s, and which is not so different now. I mean, we moved the needle a little bit, but as the industry sort of panics about economic situations and things get canceled and companies are being allowed to conglomerize and the number of shows and the number of productions is going down.
Yep.
We're seeing also that the ones that are getting cut or the ones that are never being greenlit in the first place are noticeably often stories from women, people of color, queer voices. And so the sort of contracting of the industry often makes these problems worse.
So basically, support all of your women, your friends of color, and your queer friends in the media spaces.
Right. And I want to be clear, I'm not just talking about in front of the camera, right? It's not just
Yeah.
a like, let's count the actors, right? I'm also talking about writers, producers, directors, people who have the talent and the experience,
Yep.
but who are not paid commensurate with that, who do not have projects greenlit to the same extent. And that compounds on itself, right? So credits beget more credits. Like you make this much on a picture, the next one maybe you make more, right? So it's this kind of, it's not just a question of right now, it's a question of, but what about the next 5 projects?
Right.
And if you get a credit on this project, like if you get a credit working on Insecure on HBO, which is an incredible show,
Yes.
that credit is going to help you get another job, right?
Yep.
Which is going to help you get another job, which is going to help you get another job. So it's not just a question of individual decisions, it's a question of sort of compounding, narrowing of opportunity.
Yeah.
And the people who are in creative decision making positions, it's harder to get up there, right? It's harder to get up to that point if at every step you're kind of always at a disadvantage.
Yeah. Absolutely. Any last things that we should not bring back or keep doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I talk to my students about this all the time, and I always kind of preface this by saying we're going to learn a lot about the television industry that you're not going to like, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to make you happy.
Right.
That's not me saying television is horrible, don't watch television.
Right.
I love television. Like
Yeah.
I'm a television junkie.
Yeah.
I spend my days looking up the dirtiest details. Like I love television.
Yeah.
So I don't want this to turn into television is just irredeemably racist and sexist and
Right.
you can't, do anything about it. I just want to like make it clear that you can love something, you can have great hope in its potential and still recognize that there are areas that are inherently unjust or
Yeah.
there are areas that even if we don't want to get into like a question of justice, what if we get into a question of I don't want to keep watching the same stuff.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I want some other stories here. I want stories that speak to me in different ways. So loving something and thinking it's perfect are two very different things.
Yeah.
So I try to approach the television industry with a critical eye, but with a sense of hope, which is very difficult some days, right? It's very difficult, but I really believe that television can do absolutely incredible things if we let it. And sometimes it's not up to me. Sometimes it's not up to you to
Yeah.
make those decisions. We're not going to be able to influence every decision that happens. But I think trying to approach the things we are unhappy about with regard to the television industry with a sense of curiosity and excitement and hope
Yeah.
are the only things that are going to help us move forward. And it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's going to be a lot of different things and it's not always going to work and there're going to be things that are going to break our hearts. But I think approaching it with this could be so great. There's so much potential here. Let's keep fighting for it to be what it can be.
Yeah.
I think that is a better place to come at this from.
Molly, thank you so much for joining me today. And like just everything you've talked about has been so amazing and just really helped me deepen my understanding of all of this even further. And I really love that, you have this perspective of, okay, we've got a little bit of a dirty past, but also like how can we incrementally make it better because we know it has so much power, and being able to celebrate the past while also moving into the present and in the future. So thank you so much for joining me today and for giving your expertise.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
This is not one we could watch together. However, I still have a review for it. Because there were so many stipulations on it only existing at UCLA right now in their archives, and that it was shot on film rather than being shot live. And so the things that I really loved about it are that it's a bunch of different stories, but there's a narrator who's there with you at the beginning of every episode. They're really guiding you through these different stories that don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, but I think especially for television, like that's such a brilliant way to move throughout a space, especially when those things don't really seem to line up. The thing that I probably wouldn't bring back though is which I think would be harder to do anyway, just based on how technology works, is the fact that this was one of the only first episodes of the Emmys that we actually can watch. And even then, it's still a select few if you're in the area, you know? So I think making sure that any of our live television is also being recorded is a huge thing that we need to make sure we're implementing. And so even though that's not necessarily an ick that we face today, I think it's something that we should make sure we keep doing. Okay. No, that's great. Steve Martin. Love that guy. Oh, I'm so excited. Okay. Okay. Already a big fan. All right, talk soon. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. See you tomorrow.